and also welcome anyone who's watching on the live streaming. We've had a very successful 2 weeks, and we're now here in the plenary session. Before we start, I would like to invite the Director of the Air Navigation Bureau of ICAO to provide a final report on the credentials of the meeting.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Good morning, everyone. I'd like to present the final count of participants at the 13th ICAO Air Navigation Conference. The conference had a very high number of attendants with 1,022 representatives external to the headquarters organization and delegations from 116 states and 37 international organizations. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Director of the Air Navigation Bureau, for the report on the credentials. I would now like to invite the chairpersons of the committees to give a quick summation of the work of the committees. Committee A Chair, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Excellencies, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, good morning. I wish to thank states, international organizations, and the ICAO Secretariat for all the support in Committee A, which ensured the efficient management of our agenda. Your contribution to the continuing development of aviation over the last 2 weeks was tremendous. Committee A discussed agenda items 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. The committee reviewed 223 papers presented by the ICAO Secretariat, states, and international organizations on the following topics. The Air Navigation Global Strategy, which considered the vision, performance ambitions, and overview proposed for the 6th edition of the Global Air Navigation Plan. The latest developments of the aviation system block upgrades and the basic building blocks frameworks, the air navigation roadmaps, and methodology for development of business cases. The committee then moved to enabling the global air navigation system, which reviewed papers on aerodrome operations and capacity, integrated CNS and spectrum strategy, and the future provisions for aeronautical meteorology. Further, the committee discussed enhancements to the global air navigation system, such as system-wide information management, flight and flow information for a collaborative environment, and trajectory-based operations, air traffic flow management, civil-military cooperation, and other ATM issues. The committee also considered the role of planning and implementation regional groups in implementing the global air navigation system through discussions on the economic benefits brought by aviation, the basic building blocks and minimum service standards, implementing ASBOs for performance improvements, along with search and rescue processes and procedures. Finally, Madam Chair, Committee A discussed the emerging issues generated by such topics as operations above flight level 600, operations below 1,000 feet, remotely piloted aircraft systems, cyber resilience, including other emerging issues as unmanned aircraft systems and supersonic and commercial space operations. In all, Committee A agreed on 34 recommendations, which are presented for ratification. Back to you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I would like to thank you for the tremendous work you did in chairing Committee A. I wish now to pass the floor to the Committee B Chair.
Excellencies, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, good morning. It's my turn to thank states, international organizations, and the ICAO Secretariat for all the support in Committee B. This event provided us with a unique opportunity for professional networking and to discuss problems of mutual interest. I appreciate the active participation in the discussions that took place during the last few days. Committee B reviewed agenda items 6, 7, and 8. Committee B reviewed papers presented which highlighted specific safety subjects. We discussed the future approach to managing aviation safety and the use of CMA methodology, safety tools evolution, and means to assist states with their oversight responsibilities in the rapidly evolving aviation industry. Additionally, the committee reviewed papers presented which highlighted current safety targets, focus on effective and efficient regional collaboration, and the resulting discussions will provide valuable inputs to the 2020 to 2022 edition of the GASP. Committee B agreed on 16 recommendations which are presented for ratification at the plenary. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and thank you as well for your efficient work of chairing Committee B. We are now here in the plenary to accept the committee reports. Many experts that have contributed over the last few weeks have already left, so we are not here to reopen the technical discussions, but we are here to agree that the yellow cover reports accurately reflect what was discussed in the review of the individual agenda item reports during the committees. So I would now like to invite the conference to consider the reports. We will proceed with the adoption of the report by agenda item. The committee chairperson will present each agenda item, and I will then highlight the recommendation individually by number, title, and the number of recommendations they contain for states and ICAO. I will then seek for approval by the conference of the recommendations. So with that, let us begin with agenda item 1, and I invite the Committee A chairperson to present agenda item 1. Committee A chair.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Agenda item 1, Air Navigation Global Strategy. This agenda item focused on the 6th edition of the Global Air Navigation Plan, its vision and the performance ambitions. It also discussed the latest developments of the Aviation System Block Upgrades Framework, the Basic Building Blocks Framework, the air navigation roadmaps, and the methodology for development of business cases. This agenda had 4 recommendations. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I will now seek the conference agreement for the following recommendations. Recommendation 1.1-1, Vision and Overview of the 6th edition of the Global Air Navigation Plan, Doc 9750 GAMP. This recommendation had 4 recommendations for states and 6 recommendations for ICAO. Are there any objections? I see no objections from the floor. So we continue with recommendation 1.2/1, Global Technical Level of the 6th edition of the Global Air Navigation Plan, Doc 9750. This has 2 recommendations for states and international organizations and 9 recommendations for ICAO. Are there any objections?
I have a note from the Secretary.
Secretariat, please.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. There is a editorial that needs to be made for recommendation 1.2/1 subpara B. This was pointed out by one of the states, and we concur that it was not properly captured. The statement currently reads, agree in principle, comma, with, and it should read correctly, welcome the updated ASBU framework and consider the initial version of the Basic Building Blocks, BBB, framework. Thank you, Madam Chairwoman.
Thank you, Secretary. Australia, you have the floor.
Thank you, Chair, and good morning, fellow ANC survivors. Just a very small correction on paragraph D. Make available the ASBU, and I think the word should be in proposed BBB framework to be consistent with the rest of the report. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Australia. Netherlands, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Good morning, colleagues. First, I would like to express my support for the proposal made by the Secretariat on recommendation B. And thank you for that. I would like to make a proposal for recommendation F in combination with recommendation H, because we think there is also overlap between these recommendations which could be, let's say, solved by my proposal, hopefully. The first proposal would be on recommendation F to delete the words flexible framework for and to include wordings on the word threats, which is a very well-known concept in the GAMP, and we think was also discussed in relation to all the elements mentioned in this recommendation. In this way, the recommendation F would read, consider designing threats to incorporate emerging air navigation concepts such as, etc., etc. The second proposal I would like to make to the meeting on this recommendation F would be to combine recommendation F with recommendation H on the global aviation internet network and to incorporate that in F. In this way, the recommendation F would read the last part of this recommendation, to be clear. UAS traffic management, big data, and a globally defined aviation internet network into future editions of the GAMP and in coordination with aviation and non-aviation related industries. And this last part is also coming from recommendation H. Thank you.
Thank you, Netherlands. Just to be clear, can you read out what recommendation F would be proposed to be in its entirety?
Yes. So it would be consider designing threats to incorporate emerging air navigation concepts such as unmanned aircraft systems, UAS, UAS traffic management, UTM, big data, and a globally defined aviation internet network, into future editions of the GAMP and in coordination with aviation and non-aviation related industries.
Thank you, Netherlands. Before we go further, we just need to clarify whether this discussion was actually had when the review of the report of Agenda Item 1 was taken, and whether this is an item that was discussed during that review but was somehow not captured in the yellow cover report. Brazil, you have the floor.
Graças, senhora Presidente. Eu compreendo perfeitamente as intenções.
I understand the intentions of Australia's comment, but I don't think it is a good idea to combine F and H. During the discussions, we agreed that the Secretariat proposals were fine, and I don't think that it's a good idea now to change anything after the deliberations. This is not the right time. Thank you.
Thank you, Brazil. I would like to invite the conference to indicate whether they feel that this item was actually, those of you who were there during the review of the report on agenda item 1, whether this item was actually discussed during that time and therefore should be reopened at this time, or whether the discussions, the recommendation as drafted reflects the discussion during Committee A. Spain.
Gracias, señora.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, everyone. We believe that recommendation F and H reflect the discussions very well. And this has been emphasized by the Netherlands. We support that this is just a way of re-editing regarding GAMP. And I believe that there's some confusion. I think it would be best to accept the proposal from Netherlands. In fact, to unite F and H would be a good idea. Thank you.
Thank you, Spain. United States, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We recall during the discussions with Working Paper 64 that, as stated, with F and H separate was the way that the conversation went. And as we recall, Portugal, Netherlands, Rwanda, South Africa, Colombia, Kenya, Mexico, and ACAC all supported that. Thank you.
Thank you, United States. Do I see any support from the floor for the recommendation made by the Netherlands? Greece, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mrs. President, and good morning to all. I support the recommendation made by Netherlands and supported by Spain. And I think according to our discussion, the recommendation in point 8, it's really very new to be separately as it is referred in that place. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Greece. I just need to bring the conference back to the point of order that we're not here to reopen any technical discussions. The conference is here to accept that the recommendations as presented by Committee A reflect what was discussed during the Committee A. I've heard several people say that the Committee A recommendation as it's presented to us now is accurate, and the problem we're going to have if we start this is we might all be here until tomorrow redrafting all the recommendations. So I would ask the conference to respect the discussions that were had and respect the point of order of this particular agreement. Thank you. Germany, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. In fact, 2 weeks of a conference is quite a while, so the remembrance of the participants may vary, but I recall very much that we did not have a conclusion to end up with to design a threat, but rather to consider designing a threat. Thank you very much.
Mr. Secretary, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman, and thank you for all the comments regarding the actual points themselves. It is, to some degree, a sense of deja vu if you were in the Committee A discussions during the actual technical deliberations, and then to have reviewed the initial draft report, which was taken, I believe, almost 1 week ago, and then after that, to see the yellow cover report produced and have it checked, which was done in Committee A, and then now to see the material for the last time with additional proposals being suggested that are different from what was reviewed in the yellow cover final review in Committee A. So I appreciate the intervention from the representative of Germany. It is difficult to keep track of all of the different elements of the intervention, and that is why, from the Secretariat's perspective, we urge that the conference work from the final discussion of the yellow cover report and confirm whether the drafts that are in front of you today reflect what was taken in that final review, not in the committee discussion itself or in the initial draft, but in the committee's review of the final draft. Because if the committee adjusted and the Secretariat did not effectively capture the adjustments proposed during the yellow cover review, that should be raised at this point. We have a much diminished membership of the two committees in this final plenary today, and the integrity of the conference itself would be suspect if we are not able to effectively honor the review that was taken in the final reviews of the committees. Having said all of that, we were notified that there was an interest in this particular recommendation and reviewed the tape of the discussions, and we did not hear an intervention proposing this particular merging of these two sub-items during the yellow cover final review. So from our perspective, we'll leave it to the conference to decide if it wants to reopen this here, which would mean this may be the way we proceed on many of the recommendations through the day, or if we want to accept the final deliberations and review from the committee itself. Madam Chairwoman.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. Could I please ask for a show of support to accept the final recommendation from the Committee A as drafted, with the change proposed in little b to say welcome, and the change proposed in little d to say proposed basic building block framework? Thank you. I see wide support, so we will adopt agenda item recommendation 1.2-1. Germany, you wish to speak?
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. I did not talk on the merging of the two recommendations, but I rather highlighted one specific issue, and this was the question of whether to design a threat or to consider to design a threat. So this was a particular point, and so it's only point I have made. Again, recollections, yes or no, I do still cannot remember that there was any wide support or support from the committee, and I cannot recall the draft report to adequately reflect that there would have been support for design a threat, but rather to consider to design a threat.
Thank you, Germany. Can those who were in Committee A, in the Committee A review of this agenda item, concur that the room considered designing a thread? Can you please indicate your support? Thank you very much. Is there anybody that opposes consider designing a threat in little h? Belgium, you are opposed? Okay, thank you. So with that, we make the small change to little h to say consider designing a thread. And with that, I think the room has, accepted recommendation 1.2/1. We now move on to recommendation 1.3/1, air navigation roadmaps, with one recommendation for states, 1 recommendation for states and ICAO, and 3 recommendations for ICAO. Are there any objections? I see no objections. Continuing with recommendation 1.4/1, cost-benefit analysis in support of assets deployment, with 2 recommendations for states and international organizations and 1 recommendation for ICAO. Are there any objections? I see no objections from the floor. The conference has now adopted agenda item 1. Continuing with agenda item 2, I invite Committee A chairperson to present agenda item 2. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Agenda item 2, enabling the global air navigation system. In this agenda item, the committee reviewed papers addressing the improvement on aerodrome operations and the reinforcement of its relationship with the air traffic management environment, and a future strategy to increase aerodrome capacity and integrated CNS, a spectrum strategy, and how MET services will be provided in the future. This agenda item had 8 recommendations. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I will now seek the conference agreement for the following recommendations. Recommendation 2.1/1, aerodrome capacity and efficiency enhancement, with 2 recommendations for states and 4 recommendations for ICAO. Are there any objections? Austria, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just going to the recommendation F, Foxtrot. We well noted the modification of such as new experience travel technologies were changed. There might be a necessity to change as well the end of the sentence to support their implementation instead of to support its implementation. This would reflect to have more than one solution. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Austria, for that editorial. I see no objections from the floor. So we will continue with recommendation 2.2/1, long-term evolution of communication, navigation, and surveillance systems and frequency spectrum access, with 2 recommendations for states and 2 recommendations for ICAO. Are there any objections? I see no objections from the floor, so we continue with recommendation 2.2/2, Global Navigation Satellite System, GNSS, evolution, with 5 recommendations for states and 3 recommendations for ICAO. Are there any objections? Thank you. I see no objections from the floor. So we continue with recommendation 2.3/1, future provisions of aeronautical meteorological service, with 1 recommendation for states and 2 recommendations for ICAO. Are there any objections? I see no objections, so we continue with recommendation 2.3/2, future development of IWXXM for the exchange of aeronautical meteorological information, with 1 recommendation for states and 2 recommendations for ICAO. Are there any objections? I see no objections from the floor. We will continue with recommendation 2.3/3, provision of space weather information service meeting the operational needs of users, with 1 recommendation for states and 2 recommendations for ICAO. Are there any objections to this recommendation? I see no objections, so we will continue with recommendation 2.3/4, development of cost recovery mechanisms for the provision of aeronautical meteorological information. This has 2 recommendations for ICAO. Are there any objections? I see no objections. The conference has now adopted agenda item 2. Continuing with agenda item 3, I invite Committee A chairperson to present agenda item 3. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Agenda item 3, enhancing the global air navigation system. This agenda examined a system to exchange data and information on a global basis, which can support the evolution of the air navigation system towards trajectory-based operations, the improvement of air traffic flow management, and improve civil-military cooperation and collaboration for the benefit of all. It also addressed other ATM issues. This agenda item had 10 recommendations. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I will now seek the conference agreement for the following recommendations. Recommendation 3.1/1, System-Wide Information Management, SWIM, with 4 recommendations for states and 6 recommendations for ICAO. Are there any objections? Australia, you have the floor.
Thank you, Chair. Just in relation to recommendation E, yes, there was an insertion put into that recommendation after the original draft from the Secretariat, which we were happy with. I must admit it doesn't read as well now with the insertion of while including relevant guidance, governance aspects, information content and related information exchange model and supporting. If the committee wishes to keep that insertion in there, can we at least put it in brackets? Australia's preference would be just to take it out, but we're happy if it has to stay to put it in brackets. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Australia, and that's just in the interest of improving readability?
Correct, Chair. It's not a change to the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Australia. Greece, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I would like to make a proposal that doesn't change the substance of the recommendations, but improving the readability. So we propose to merge the little a and little c into one point. That reads support development and implementation of system-wide information management by sharing information, lessons learned and observations regarding SWIP. Thank you, Mrs. Chair.
Thank you, Australia, and thank you, Greece. I think as we are not really changing the intent but making editorials, I would ask the conference if you are willing to accept the recommendations as they are in the yellow cover report. If you would prefer to accept them as they are, please indicate your support. I see wide support for accepting the recommendations as they are. I thank Australia and Greece very much for the clarifications, but I think everybody can understand the intent of the recommendations as they are written. I will now move on to recommendations 3.2/1, trajectory-based operations, TBO, with 3 recommendations for states along with stakeholders and 2 recommendations for ICAO. Are there any objections? I see no objections from the floor. We will continue with recommendation 3.2/2, Flight and Flow Information for a Collaborative Environment, FFICE, with 1 recommendation for states, along with stakeholders, and 2 recommendations for ICAO. Are there any objections? Greece, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. We have just a small addition in little b of ICAO recommendations. In the second line, after flight plan, we propose to add data, flight plan data processing and FFIs. Thank you.
Can I just confirm again whether this point was brought up during the discussion of Agenda Item 3 reports? Greece?
Yes, it captures that we have discussed already. Thank you.
Secretariat, you wish to clarify?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Good morning. The proposal, as expressed by Greece, is correct. However, simpler text reduced the number of words to what is placed in here, and the text that is in Working Paper 311 is the decision of the Committee A. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Does it make a material difference? No. Thank you, Secretariat. Is the conference happy to accept recommendation 3.2/2 as it is currently written? Thank you very much. I see support for recommendation 3.2/2 as it is. I will now move on to recommendation 3.3/1, network operations, with 2 recommendations for states and 2 recommendations for ICAO. Are there any objections? Switzerland, you have the floor.
Good morning, and thank you, Madam Chair. Switzerland would like to make a small proposal with regard to 3.3/1 in the first A, and that would read as follows: implement collaborative decision-making processes in support of effective airspace management, and then striking in and replacing it by "and the provision of air navigation services," because we believe that the airspace management and the provision of air navigation services are 2 different aspects, and this needs to be reflected by replacing it with an "and." Thank you very much.
Thank you, Switzerland. And just to confirm, was this brought up in the final report of Agenda Item 3? Switzerland?
As we recall, and my German colleague said, the recollection can sometimes be a bit impacted by the time, but I think it were 2 different aspects, and I think this should be properly reflected in the report. Thank you.
Can I please have an indication from the conference whether you would prefer to accept recommendation 3.3/1 as it is currently drafted? Excuse me. I see support from the floor for recommendation 3.3/1 as it is. Moving on to recommendation 3.3/2, civil military cooperation implementation, with 1 recommendation for states and 2 recommendations for ICAO. Are there any objections from the floor? Sorry?
Recommendation 341 should be correct.
Sorry, let me restart because I think I might have left out a recommendation which would not be very good on my part. So we move to recommendation 3.4/1, civil-military collaboration, which has 2 recommendations for states and 4 recommendations for ICAO. Are there any objections from the floor? I see no objections. We will move now to recommendation 3.4/2, civil-military cooperation implementation, with 1 recommendation for states and 2 recommendations for ICAO. Are there any objections from the floor? I see no objections from the floor. The Secretariat just pointed out that little g should actually read A and little h should actually read B, at least in the English version of the report. We will now move on to recommendation 3.5/1, ICAO location indicator system and database of significant points, with 2 recommendations for states and industry stakeholders and 5 recommendations for ICAO. Are there any objections? I see no objections from the floor. Moving to recommendation 3.5/2, coordinated crisis management, with 1 recommendation for states and 1 recommendation for ICAO. Are there any objections? I see no objections. Recommendation 3.5/3, certification of ANSPs, with 1 recommendation for ICAO. Are there any objections? I see no objections from the floor. Continuing on with recommendation 3.5/4, True North, with 1 recommendation for ICAO. Are there any objections? I see no objections from the floor. During the review of the draft report of Agenda Item 3, which is Working Paper 303, Committee A concurred with the text in paragraph 3.46, with the exception of the Russian Federation. The Russian Federation disagreed and made a statement that included proposed recommendations to states and ICAO. The committee, however, did not accept the Russian Federation's proposal. At the request of the Russian Federation, the Secretariat has placed the Russian Federation statement at the end of agenda item concerned on page 315 under paragraph 3.49 in accordance with procedure. This placement does not reflect the committee or the conference's endorsement of the statements of delegations, and this will be noted in the plenary report. The conference has now adopted Agenda Item 3. Continuing with Agenda Item 4, I invite Committee A Chairperson to present Agenda Item 4.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Agenda Item 4, implementing the Global Air Navigation System and the role of planning and implementation regional groups. This agenda item discusses papers on the contribution of aviation to state economic development, the role of PERGs in contribution to regional development, how to facilitate the basic building blocks implementation, and how to improve search and rescue processes and procedures implementation. This agenda item had 5 recommendations. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I realize that the yellow cover reports for agenda items 4 and 5 were only published this morning, so I seek the conference's acceptance to discuss them. If you have any objections to discussing them, please push your button now. Thank you very much. The conference has accepted to discuss agenda item 4. So I would now like to seek the conference agreement for the following recommendations. Recommendation 4.1/1, State National Development Plans, with 2 recommendations for states and 2 recommendations for ICAO. Are there any objections? I see no objections from the floor. We will continue with recommendation 4.2/1, Implementation of Minimum Air Navigation Services, with 2 recommendations for states and 5 recommendations for ICAO. Are there any objections? Australia, you have the floor.
Thank you, Chair. The recommendation A, B, C, D, F, and G all use the word basic or minimum. That is not the agreed expression, Chair. The committee conference has clearly agreed to the word essential air navigation services. We also note that in recommendation B, again, we need to put the proposed BBB framework. So can I ask that that change be made through each of the recommendations, Chair? And no, we are not revisiting something that we have discussed before. This is what we agreed. Thank you.
Thank you, Australia. I was actually in the room, and I do recall that discussion. Can I ask for acceptance from the floor to make the changes proposed by Australia? I see why. Now move on to 4.2.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and good morning to everyone. I have no objection for recommendations as such, but I would propose for a small change to clarify the intention of the recommendation. I propose to add to the second row of the text, after word including, add word there, and delete part of the work. This was proposed also during the review of the draft report on this item, and as I recall, there were no objection to the proposal at the time. I can read the proposal for the new text if you wish.
Thank you, Finland. If you could just specify which subparagraph you're talking about and then read slowly the proposed new text. Thank you.
Yeah, sorry, my bad. So it would be on the recommendation E. And I will read the proposal for the new text on recommendation 4.3/1E. Continue to expedite the work on performance indicators related to the Global Air Navigation Plan, including their review by an appropriate group of performance experts, and consider establishing such an expert group under the Global Air Navigation Plan Study Group. Thank you.
Thank you, Finland. I do recall this discussion in the Committee A session yesterday. Can I please ask for acceptance from the floor for this proposed change to little e echo? Thank you, Finland. I just want to note that I saw wide acceptance of what you were proposing, but the Secretariat makes a small point of order in that the conference cannot establish a group. The conference can only recommend that ICAO establishes a group. So with the proposal that you made and adding the qualifier that ICAO consider establishing a group, can we move forward in that manner? United Kingdom, you have the floor.
I was merely signalling support for your suggestion, Chair.
Thank you, United Kingdom. Can the room agree this proposed change to recommendation 4.3/1? Thank you very much. That change will be made. Moving now to recommendation 4.3/2, regional and national collaboration and implementation initiatives, with 6 recommendations for states and 7 recommendations for ICAO. Are there any objections? Nicaragua, you have the floor.
Disculpe. No.
Apologize.
Okay, so I see no objections from the floor. We will continue then with recommendation 4.4/1, search and rescue and the Global Aeronautical Distress and Safety System, GADS, with 3 recommendations for states and 6 recommendations for ICAO. Are there any objections? I see no objections from the floor. The conference has now adopted agenda item 4. Continuing with agenda item 5, I invite Committee A chairperson to present agenda item 5.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm pleased to present the report on the final agenda item dealt with by Committee A, emerging issues. Under agenda item 5, the committee discussed higher airspace and low altitude operations, UTM, the regulatory framework to enable the integration of RPAS in non-segregated airspace, cyber resiliency, commercial space operations, and supersonic transport. This agenda item had several recommendations. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I will now seek the conference agreement for the following recommendations. Recommendation 5.1/1, operations above flight level 600, with 2 recommendations for states and 5 recommendations for ICAO. Are there any objections? Senegal, you have the floor.
Merci.
Thank you very much. I just wanted to say that for this recommendation, there was a correction requested, and it was made in the title, which is that it should say flight level above 600. And then in A, B, D, and F, we have upper airspace, higher airspace, rather. And we believe that this should be taken into account. Also, 5.9, the same issue. We are talking about airspace above flight level 600. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Senegal. I do recall that there was discussions requesting ICAO to clarify what was meant by higher and upper airspace, and ICAO resolved to do that during the upcoming work. We agreed to change the title of recommendation 5.1/1 to operations above flight level 600. I do not recall any agreement to change the text in the actual proposed recommendations. Can I ask the floor if they would prefer to stay with the recommendation as it exists now? Thank you. I see acceptance on the floor for the recommendation as it currently stands. France, you have the floor.
Merci.
Thank you, Chair. And thank you for being the chairperson here. Good day, everybody. My delegation would like to support the recommendation from Senegal. And in terms of methods, I think it is important for the proposals made by both of us should be considered by the other states. Thank you.
Thank you, Fran. So can I take it that you accept the proposal from Senegal? What would be the changes in the actual recommendations?
Merci, Madame.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The proposal from Senegal is to use the expression flights above flight level 600 everywhere. For the simple reason, this is a comment that was made yesterday, is that the expression higher airspace or lower airspace doesn't reflect well in the other languages of ICAO. Thank you.
Thank you, France, and thank you, Senegal. I'm just conferring with the item secretary, and both of our recollections are that this item was indeed discussed yesterday at quite some length, in fact, and that ICAO resolved that they would review the terminology for higher airspace in the work going forward, because there might be other considerations that need to be taken into account that were not perhaps immediately apparent. With that, can the conference, Senegal, you have the floor.
Excuse me, Madam Chair, I'm sorry that I'm insisting. I just wanted to reflect in the text the content of our discussions. If the text is left as is, it means that many people won't understand. The problem is not just higher airspace, but principally it's in the part, in the envelope above flight level 600. Therefore, at the level of recommendations A, B, D, E, and F, we would like it to say flights above FL 600 rather than higher airspace. That would make it possible for everyone to easily understand the problem. Thank you.
Thank you, Senegal. Nigeria, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Chair. Nigeria also supports France and Senegal. For consistency and ease of understanding, we prefer operations above level 600. Thank you.
Thank you, Nigeria. Netherlands, you have the floor.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I must say this time my recollection is not that we agreed on making these changes to the report, and that we would keep with the phrase as is currently in the text, and also with what you said, the proposal of the Secretariat to look into the terminology. Thank you.
Australia, you have the floor.
Can Australia suggest, to help our friends from Senegal, that a paragraph be drafted in the text to indicate their concern about the definition needing to be clarified as soon as possible about what is meant by the term? But Chair and Secretariat, you're 100% correct. The outcome was that we would change the heading and that we would leave the rest of the text as is. But I think, given the concern from our colleagues in Senegal, that a text paragraph is required in the body of the text. Thank you.
Thank you, Australia. Nicaragua, you have the last word.
Muchas gracias, señora presidenta.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. If I remember correctly, we even voted on it, on the text that was suggested by the Secretariat. We can't reopen the debate. There was a proposal from France and Senegal, but I think we must remember that there was a vote taken the other day.
Thank you, Nicaragua, and I agree. And just to, as for the proposal by our colleagues from Australia, paragraph 5.1 actually does state that the term higher airspace operations, that concern was raised with this term, and they noted the need to review the terminology in all official languages of the organization. So that will be taken forward. So with that, I think we will adopt 5.1/1 as it currently is written in the yellow cover report. We move now to recommendation 5.2/1, very low altitude operations, with 2 recommendations for states and 10 recommendations for ICAO. Are there any objections? I see no objections from the floor. Recommendation 5.3/1, remotely piloted aircraft systems, RPAS, with 3 recommendations for states and 6 recommendations for ICAO. Are there any objections? Finland, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I would like to make a proposal and clarification to recommendation B in this paragraph. I believe that the clarification presented by reviewing the draft report was slightly misunderstood. The intention was to refer to SARPs rather than data. I read the proposal for clarification here. So the B would sound actively engage industry stakeholders to collect and provide technical data to ICAO on ARPAS operations needed to support the development of SARPs for ARPAS, including those SARPs required for detect and avoid and C2 link. So not to make reference to data, but to the SARPs was the intention. Thank you.
Thank you, Finland, and I recall that was an intervention made by Poland as you read it. So I do agree that that is something that was agreed in the room yesterday. Can the conference agree to the change as proposed to little b for 5.3/1? I see acceptance for this change. Thank you. Are there any other objections to recommendation 5.3/1? I see no objections from the floor. We will continue with recommendation 5.4/1, cyber resilience, with 5 recommendations for states and 9 recommendations for ICAO. France, you have the floor.
Merci.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Good day, everyone. I would like to thank the Secretariat for all of the work that has been done during this conference, and particularly the production of the reports that we are reviewing today. Nonetheless, I noticed in 5.34 that the sentences approved yesterday during the committee discussion were forgotten in the report. I can only assume that this is an oversight, because it referred to compliance with national and regional laws and regulations, and to the principle of competitiveness and fair competition between the actors. So there was no opposition at all during the discussion, and so I recall this, and I was very happy that the discussions happened yesterday and that everybody still has a fresh memory of what happened. So I will repeat. In 5.34, after the second sentence, which ends with global aviation system,
the following. It should equally allow various states to accord for their essential aeronautical infrastructures with their national or regional obligations. Period. A global aviation framework should not be detrimental to fair competition between aviation stakeholders.
So this was fully agreed yesterday during the debates. I will also have an intervention sur la recommandation.
On the next recommendation, and also a request for clarification and a modification because the recommendation does not reflect the wording proposed yesterday during the discussions. Thank you. And perhaps we could deal with the body of the text before moving on to the recommendation. Thank you.
Thank you, France. I agree that the sentences you proposed for that particular paragraph 5.34 were agreed by the room yesterday, so those changes will be made. We will now move on then to recommendation 5.4/1.
Merci, Madame la Présidente.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I would like to refer to little n as proposed in recommendation 5.4/1, which is actually in English.
Unified framework for an integrated risk management approach to cyber resilience, taking into account all hazards and threats to the air navigation system. Alors, bon.
I recognize that the terms here reflect more or less the general idea of what we had proposed yesterday and which was accepted. Nonetheless, I would like to understand why the terms have been changed and what the implication is for the changes. And I will remind the proposal.
An integrated risk management approach taking into account risks inherent to the cyber threats as well as the ones relating to safety and security of air transport and to the needs of aviation systems operations. Merci, Madame.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you very much, friends. As you say, we have to give credence to the Secretariat for turning around these reports in all 6 languages from the changes we made yesterday, which I think they've done a tremendous job. So just hold on one second and I can confer with the Secretariat with regards to any clarification. Friends, in the meantime, can you please reread the recommendation as you thought it was agreed yesterday?
Yes, Madame la Présidente. Oui, Madame la Présidente.
Yes, Madam Chair.
Je relis en anglais.
I am rereading in English.
Promote a systemic and integrated risk management approach, taking into account risks inherent to cyber threats as well as the ones relating to safety and security of air transport and to the needs of aviation systems operations. Thank you.
Thank you, friends. I do recall that was the gist of what was discussed, but I don't recall the exact words, so excuse us 1 minute.
Sorry.
The Secretary will make a clarification.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman, and thank you to France for the recollection. The change was made to reflect an alignment with some text that we have in the recommendations related to safety management and SSP, and so the change reflects the same consistency in developing a unified framework for an integrated risk management approach. That is also reflected in the other agenda item. We tried to reflect the change of, or the intent as he indicated that an integrated risk management approach needs to be taken, and we tried to reflect it within the content of the safety and air navigation strategic objectives. Thank you, Madam Chair.
France, does this answer your point, your query?
Merci.
Thank you, Madam Chair. This is, in fact, a response that we appreciate. We appreciate the coordination and the fact that the modified text will be submitted so that we can be sure that our intention was captured. But this proposal does cover integrated risk management. And regarding safety and security, it's covered through the words hazards and threats. Therefore, I think that this is suitable. However, I would like that the committee and the conference remain quite aware of the fact that cybersecurity needs to be looked at integratedly with safety, security, and cybersecurity taken all together in an integrated risk management approach. It's fundamental. This is an issue that is being put to ICAO internally, and it is also being put to all of the CAAs in their own organizations. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, France. And I do agree that that was a point that was widely made yesterday, so that has been noted. Spain, you have the floor.
Muchas gracias.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Good morning, everyone. I would like to speak to two aspects of France's intervention. It does not seem to coordinate with what the Secretariat proposes. The Secretariat is looking for the integrated risk management approach being a promotion concept. So therefore, the concepts are written here. The idea in a unified framework is what France wants. They want integrated risk management. And France also mentioned the need to reflect safety and security in an exercise that is more exhaustive. And this is why we as a delegation will support this. Thank you.
Thank you, Spain. So are you indicating you will support the recommendation as it is drafted here, with the understanding that we all agreed in the room yesterday that it must be an integrated safety, security management system? Spain, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yes, we could agree, but we think that the Secretariat could revisit these two concepts and in the framework of an integrated risk management approach, as France had mentioned, then speak in the recommendation of cybersecurity and security. Thank you.
Thank you, Spain. So we can reflect that in the revised recommendation? Mr. Secretary?
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman, and thank you to Spain for the support for the concept that was introduced by France. The Secretariat actually concurs with the need to do integrated risk management and to include all aspects of safety, security, environment, and even financial impact in these risk assessment processes. In trying to adjust the language, we were trying to match with the language that's drafted in Recommendation 6.2.11 under sub H, and that language is similar to the way this is constructed. What I would offer is to put in parentheses under integrated risk management approach in brackets, safety, security, comma, et cetera, to spell that out. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. France?
Merci, Madame.
Thank you, Madam Chair. We appreciate the Secretary's effort, and we are prepared to accept that wording. Thank you.
Thank you, France. Can the conference accept the revised wording? Please indicate your support. Thank you very much. I see wide support, so we have now adopted recommendation 5.4/1. We will continue with recommendation 5.5/1, supersonic transport, with 1 recommendation for states and 2 recommendations for ICAO. Are there any objections? Switzerland, you have the floor.
Madam Chair, just please allow me to come back on the recommendation, on the deliberation actually under 5.5 and referring to 5.42 where there is a statement which I read, however, the committee acknowledged that relevant safety management principles may be applicable to the transition of suborbital flights. And here my recollection is pretty clear. I think we decided that these principles should be applicable to the transition of suborbital flights, and I think this is a notion where I think we would have to better reflect the discussions that were led in the committee. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Switzerland. I agree that that was a change that was accepted by the committee, so that change will be made in 5.42. So coming back, just for clarity, to recommendation 5.5/1, supersonic transport, with 1 recommendation for states and 2 recommendations for ICAO. Are there any objections? I see no objections from the floor. We will move on to recommendation 5.5/2, commercial space transport, with 2 recommendations for states and 2 recommendations for ICAO. Are there any objections? United Arab Emirates, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Assalamu alaikum, good morning. I just have editorial and consistent suggestion with regards to A, where we say that states and industry support. I would like to suggest that the A starts from the verb support, and before that, in consistency with the other draft reports as well, that states and stakeholders instead of industry. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, United Arab Emirates. I recall that recommendation little a was accepted yesterday in the committee A. Are there any? Does the conference wish to accept the recommendation A as it is now in the report? Okay, I see only a few. Would the conference prefer to accept the change proposed by the UAE? Sorry, the mics are not working? Okay, can I confirm you can hear me? No.
The interpreters can hear you, Madam Chair.
Okay, in that instance, as it is now coming up to 11 o'clock, I would suggest we take a coffee break. We come back at 11:25 and we will resume with recommendation 5.5/2. I had hoped to finish agenda item 5, but we'll give the technical people a chance to resolve the issue. Please be back in the room at 11:25. Thank you.